I am Joseph of Suran, Joseph of Masad, farmer, cotter, plowman, Sahugani, summoner. 9 years ago I destroyed the village of Suran with a power I could neither control nor understand. A power passed down through generations for thousands upon thousands of years, a power I never asked for and never wanted. 9 years ago, raiders attacked Suran. To save my village, I unleashed the demon, and the demon massacred all in its path. The raiders, my friends, my family.
In the past couple of weeks, Volition has been hit by a bunch of layoffs due to the underperformance of their latest game, Agents of Mayhem. So I thought I'd take the time to talk about one of their more obscure, I would say, titles. Volition is a studio known today for basically making Saints Row. That's what they've been doing for the past 6 years. That and Red Faction, the last good one was in 2009. Yet throughout their history, almost 20 years, they've made quite a lot of games. Even more when you consider that they were split off from what was once Parallax Software, the creators of Descent. And they also had that game that was supposed to be created along with Guillermo del Toro called Insane. But we're not going to talk about those games today. We're going to talk about their RPG, Summoner, also known as that game with the video where they make a reenactment of the Dead Wives D&D skit, the one with Attack in the Darkness. That's probably where most people heard it, at least all the people I know, because we had no idea what that comedy troupe actually was. Summoner was released in the year 2000 for the PlayStation 2 and in the year 2001 for the PC. I have played it many years ago, I have finished it many years ago, and I've had fond memories of it for many years. It told the story of Joseph, a child with power beyond his knowledge, a power that would bring him much grief in his life when, by trying to save the people he loved from a bandit attack, he summoned a great demon that killed everyone but him and a few very unkind survivors. Joseph would forsake his past and try to live a normal life. But when the oracles foretell that the Uranian emperor will be killed by the summoner, by Joseph, a hunt begins to track him down and murder him before he has the chance. And this ends up actually setting him on the path to becoming what he is, what he should be, the Summoner. It is a tale of tragedy, a tale of regret, a tale of betrayal, a tale of a world with dead gods that exist because of a language believed to be the source code of the universe itself, and reading it will drive you mad, blind, kill you, and not necessarily in that order. As I've said, I have fond memories of Summoner, having played it in high school over the course of many weeks. I have replayed it recently. It's available on GOG for about $5. I do not have recent fond memories of it. I will say two things about Summoner to begin with. It has not aged quite well, and parts of it were never actually as good as I remember them being. Let's start with the story itself. It's still fine, it's still as I remember it, though not as in depth. I may have read a lot between the lines back then, or maybe I took my time back then, whereas now I sort of rushed through it a bit so I can capture as much footage as I could have. The characters are not really superbly realize their full potential, but they do get across their core ideas. Joseph does not want to be the summoner. Joseph really dislikes being the summoner. Who wouldn't? He accidentally, when he was a kid, murdered everybody he knows because he tried to save them using the power that he had. You have Jakar, who really hates Joseph because he used to live in the same village as him. You've got Fleece, an enigmatic thief that stalks the night and has her own agenda. And Rosalind, who got abandoned by her dad just so her dad could travel around the world and find the summoner and educate him. So she doesn't like Joseph either. Basically, no one likes Joseph. Joseph doesn't like Joseph. To a point, I would find the characters to be relatable. They're not super heroic, they do have flaws. They are, first and foremost, people people. Now, they're not as well defined as the characters you would find in a game like Anachronox, which also came out around that time, but they were nice. And the setup for the world was also very good. The story, it had the history, the lore, that thing about there being a writing, a divine word. It was the source code of the universe, and trying to read the words would make you go blind and insane because the words would just burn themselves into your eyes. They would beckon you to read them. Also ever change and never be the same. It set up a really deep and interesting world and its lore. Through simplistic dialogue that didn't really have trees, it had one-word questions that you would ask people, and didn't matter with what character you would ask those questions, it would always be under the assumption that Joseph was the one doing the asking, apart from the bit where Joseph wasn't playable for reasons. It also had a combat system that seemed interesting. I mentioned in The Witcher 1 history that they were inspired by Summoner to create the combat system. Well, the combat system went like this. It was a simultaneous turn kind of affair with an active pause option. You would pause at any time and give other commands, interrupt actions, you know, that sort of stuff. But it had one thing that sort of set it apart. You didn't just click on a character and told him to attack or use a skill and that's it. No, once you were attacking with, well, basically with melee weapons usually, you would have a prompt on the screen, a chain. When you right-clicked, you would then proceed through that chain and unlock an extra action. Now, if you're pressing Ctrl, Alt, or Shift, or Tab, no tab caps, you would decide directly what that action would be. You could have an extra attack, you could have a confusion attack that would rob the enemy's action points, mana points, because pretty much mostly sorcerers used AP, most of the fighters just hammered at you. You could trip the enemies, you could knock them down. Depending on each character, they all had different kinds of chain attacks that they could string together. Now, those chain attacks would actually mean that you weren't hitting them in the face unless the chain attack you chose or was assigned to you if you didn't actually press one of those buttons, just to right click, would be the additional attack. So they weren't necessarily always the best approach, but it did give you some options regarding tactics and, you know, general ability to use your characters more in combat than just by hitting people in the face and using your skills. Though to be fair, you weren't actually supposed to hit them in the face. You were very much encouraged to hit them in the back because you got a bonus of about 25% or 15% when you backstab them with any weapon. Fleece had actually the ability to backstab people for massive damage. Also, the game, because it was 3D and at the time it did look quite nice, it does now, it also took elevation into account. So if you were above an enemy, if you had the high ground, you would get a bonus of 25%. So if you're on the high ground and behind an enemy, you would get 40% bonus damage, which was a lot. So it did kind of make you think tactically. Kinda. The pathfinding, the AI, the fact that sometimes your controls would be ignored sort of deflated the whole thing. It deflated it quite a lot. And the fact that most of the encounters were the same, repeating, and I have no idea honestly how I got the first time through the catacombs of Iona. It is a long, endless stream of fighting skeletons, going up and down in a place that's just brown and white, bones and dirt and skeletons. It's just a straight line. Well, it does fork at one point and comes back to itself, but it's such a boring thing. It has a puzzle, if you can call it, so you have to activate 2 blobs so you can get past the place at the end. Even the sewers, which is one of the first dungeons you visit, one of the first combat encounters outside of the tutorial area where you flee your second home village, even that sewer still has a puzzle or two involving doors and golems and wheels. The catacombs of Iona were just boring, and I mean super boring. They took quite some time because they were filled with skeletons, so to be fair, if I had just gone with one character, I could have probably tried my best to actually steer clear of the enemies. Now, Fleece does have a stealth skill which you can use to hide, but unless you had it umped to the max, you would still be seen and shot by every enemy and probably die. But if you stayed outside their range of view, which was honestly quite small, I could have probably gotten away with not killing everybody, though the end fight would have been probably a bit harder, since it would have been 1 versus 3. Well, if it was Joseph, the one that I actually got there with, would have been 2 versus 3, because Joseph is, as I've said, the summoner. He can summon things, well, elementals, mist elemental, dark elemental, fire elemental, a golem, a rock elemental, whatever that thing was. And his creatures, depending on how many points you spent in the summoning skill, will develop new abilities. They honestly are not really that useful, but since you can only have 4 characters in your party, one extra pair of hands or one extra face to be smashed in by the enemy is actually a good thing, because you can control them directly. You can get them to run around the enemies, keep them busy while you stab them in the back with everybody at the same time. Control issues really made this game kind of a chore to play now. I remember it being a bit better back then, but obviously it wasn't. Trying to handle combat or exploration tactically in a way that you would be able to plan out an encounter beforehand, like setting a trap, placing a firewall in the exact right place to get the enemies to funnel through it as they came to you. That doesn't work on account of the controls responding oddly, sometimes not actually letting you cast a spell and you just seeing Joseph run right towards them and die, and the camera somehow getting worse as you played on. Like in the beginning, the camera was fine, but when you have to deal with the constant shift in elevation, it becomes kind of hard to see exactly where the enemies are. I mean, sometimes you would just run past them and not see them at all because they're pretty much blended into the background and they don't react the first time you pass by them. What I mean to say, in short, is that the controls were not all that great. Having this game use a tactical pause system really didn't help, because it sort of still wasn't all that tactical. It didn't work well enough for that pause to actually mean something. And the chain system, yeah, that could have been a good idea, but it was sort of dragged down by everything else. And as exploration goes, it's a lot of walking, a lot of slow walking through places that are too big. The levels are just way too big for the game, because there's just repetitive fights everywhere that really serve no purpose other than you needing to get to the level that's required for the next big fight. Also, so you'll be extremely annoyed when you have to go back to the palace where Iago is, have to go through about 3 loading screens and about 4 big areas, plus the overworld. It's tedious. It's tedious as hell. Now, there are some very nice touches in it. Like I said, I like the lore of the world. I like some of the ideas of the story and some of the characters, but my god, was Summoner so boring and tedious to play again. I wanted to make this show be a positive thing. Hey, you know what? Volition made something other than Saints Row back in the day, and that was a good thing, and they maybe should try and do something like this again, but my god, it's not as good as I remember. Like, not at all. And this comes from someone that still routinely plays RPGs that are goddamn archaic and old. And those are still kind of better than this in terms of design. It's not all a wasted thing, as I've said. It does have some positive attributes. It's just kind of lackluster. And whatever good things you would see in the combat system or in the general gameplay is sort of taken out through repetition and gigantic levels that are too goddamn big. I think this is the game that sort of put me off gigantic levels in RPGs. That's why when I saw the scale of stuff in World of Warcraft, I just said no. I think subconsciously it was Summoner's fault, because even though I remember it as being good, as being a game I enjoyed, I think deep down a part of me knew that if I had something else to play back then, I probably wouldn't have played Summoner. Though, I'm gonna be fair, the bit that happens in the middle I actually enjoyed. Now, some people may call it cliche, but I thought it fit the story quite well. It sort of brought things together, and I like the ending of the game. The game has multiple choices at the end, where you have the ability to decide what happens. I won't give any spoilers, but I loved one of the endings. Like, one of the endings was just perfect. It's not the canonical ending from what I've understood, but it was an ending where the character just says, you know what? I'm gonna do my own thing. You want destiny? Find it somewhere else. I'm not your pawn anymore. Goodbye. Well, he doesn't say that, but it's sort of implied. Also, he still can do the destiny thing later in life. Now, he can just go and have a break. Well, he would have had, but the sequel establishes that he made the other choice. A sequel, by the way, that was not on PC, and I really can't comment about it because I've never played it. And that would be Summoner in a nutshell. I honestly believed I would be making a positive show had I not played played it again. Kinda makes you wonder what other games that I played before and believed they were good turned out to actually be not so good. What games that I played and thought were kinda bad were actually great. But if you are still interested in Summoner, you can absolutely find it on GOG right now for the price of around €5. €5 and a bit. It may not be as good as I remembered, but bits of it are still enjoyable. And as always, there's that video of Joseph, Jakar, some guard from Red Faction, and the Demon of Light playing Dungeons and Dragons. Goodbye.
If there's any girls there, I want to do them!